You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
If you want to get a little bit of a glimpse of what the government-regulated internet space is going to look like, you needn't look further than what happened to a good friend of True North's and of basically anyone who's picked up a newspaper in Alberta over the last many years, Lorne Gunter. This is a columnist who I actually have not had on this show. I had him on my old radio show a couple of times. But Lorne Gunter dared to criticize the Canadian government's approach to refugees and immigration more broadly. And this was something that I guess the government didn't like. So what the government did is tried to get this thing pulled from social media. There's a record of government trying to get this whole column taken off of Facebook and Twitter. And we didn't learn in the initial stories what article they were talking about, but thankfully Lorne Gunter agreed to out himself here, and he joins us now. Lorne, what have you done?
You know, I've added some specifics to a non-specific item that the government admitted to in a freedom of, well, in a parliamentary question. There was a conservative MP asked the Liberals to give some examples of efforts they'd made to have internet content controlled prior to their bill C-11, which still has not yet been proclaimed, but will become law very soon. And so there was a whole list came back, 180 pages, some with one or two items on them. And one, it says an unspecified newspaper column about the Immigration and Refugee Board. Director of Communications asked Facebook and Twitter to remove links to this item from their platforms. And so I knew who it was when I was shown it by editors. And it was a piece that I'd written in September of 2021. I'd come into possession of a confidential internal document that the IRB had, that the chairman had drafted and was circulating among staff and professionals, that said, you know, we are now going to try and make it much easier for refugees to stay in Canada. Prior to this policy that had not yet been introduced at that time, was just being debated. But prior to that, you had to show that you were under threat of torture or death if you were sent back to your home country. You had to show that you were, you know, you're in grave personal danger, or you had to prove that you met the United Nations criteria for what a legal refugee was. And this policy would have said anybody who is suffering from any two discriminations, and that would be poverty, age, sexual orientation, race, ideology, religion, any of those. If you had two of those, then there was nothing that the IRB could do, or very little that the IRB could do unless you were a security threat, to keep you out. As long as you got here, if you could say, you know, I'm gay and poor, I'm Indigenous and I have views that my government doesn't like, you know, I'm old and I'm whatever the other criteria might be. If you had any two of these intersectionality criteria, then there was very little that the adjudicators could do to keep you out of Canada. Government didn't like that I had that. And so they then went to my editors and said, you need to retract this, or you need to correct all of the following factual errors. My editor said, there are no factual errors that we can tell, and we're not going to retract it. So then the director of communications at the time of the IRB, and we're not entirely sure who that was, went to Facebook and Twitter in particular and said, we want you to take these down because they contain dangerous misinformation. And not surprisingly, that is the terminology that the Liberals are using in their new bill to try and justify handing over the power to the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, or to an Internet Safety Board to take down dangerous misinformation, even if it's legal, under their new law. So I think what we've seen with their attempts to take my piece off the internet is a glimpse of Canada's future.
Well, I fear you're right, and I just want to drill into the who for a moment. Do you know if this was someone that came from the minister's office, being someone who's a partisan Liberal staffer, or from the departmental side, which is supposed to be staffed by nonpartisan bureaucrats such as they are?
Yeah, I mean, as near as we can tell, because there's very little information about who actually made the request of the social media platform. But as near as we can tell, is a staffer from the Immigration and Refugee Board who sought to have this done. But the
So not
Immigration
someone
and
who's supposed to be a partisan.
no, no. So
Wow.
it was supposed to. It was a person who was supposed to be an objective bureaucrat who was supposed to be doing objective work, not a political operative who was trying to shine the government's apple. But from 2015 on, the Liberals had been going out of their way to appoint people who are ideologically friendly to their view of increasing immigration to places on the IRB. So the people, the permanent staffers at the IRB and the political appointees would have known on what side their bread was buttered. But they probably also would have ideologically agreed largely with the Liberals' efforts to increase. At this point, it seems funny now to consider this, but I said this is kind of outrageous because the Liberals are trying to, in one fell swoop, increase immigration to Canada, newcomers to Canada, from 300,000 a year to 400,000 a year. Well, now they've blown well past 400,000 a year. But at the time, they were trying to increase immigration by a third.
Yeah.
By using these tactics that were never going to be debated in Parliament, by increasing the criteria, by greatly expanding the ways you could claim refugee status in Canada. And they didn't like that. But it's funny because they said, well, this article is full of mistakes and misinformation. But I quoted enough of this internal document that they must have known I had the original. And
this was, I mean, I remember the column. It was reporting. It wasn't just you sort of going on about some opinion or some theoretical thing. You had the document. They would have known that document existed.
Yeah, they would have. And it was put out by the chairman of the board at the time, Richard Wex. And so they were embarrassed that it had been found out before it could become policy and make a political problem for the government. And that's, to me, that's the really troubling part, is it because it was embarrassing to them, not because it was factually incorrect, not because I was inciting riots, not because I had done something illegal, but because it was embarrassing to the government. They got caught trying to sneak through a major change to immigration and refugee policy. They wanted it pulled down. And they used the cover of dangerous misinformation to try and make that happen. Now imagine, so they go to Facebook, they go to Twitter, both of whom said, no, there's nothing wrong about this. This isn't misinformation necessarily. It's fair comment. But now imagine if under Bill C-11, the government hands the power to take those things down to the CRTC, which is full of government appointees, or even worse, to a board of internet safety, which is all government appointees. And they say, it doesn't have to be illegal for you to take it down. If you think that this is dangerous misinformation, you, the safety board or the CRTC, have the power under this new law to start deciding what can and cannot be posted on the internet. And that really frightens me.
Well, it should. And I would point out to people here that in this case, the social media companies didn't take what I would say is a particularly principled free speech view. They didn't defend your reporting. They just said, listen, your fight's not with us. It's with the Calgary Sun. It's not our original content was the line, which, as far as social media platforms go, I think that's a win. They just said to the government, we're not interested in playing this game. But you look at now, as you've alluded to, Lorne, the policies that are coming down the pipeline, which would threaten social media companies with very steep fines if they don't take down content that's identified as being being wrong in one of the several categories. And interestingly enough, I was just at a seminar about this. And if you look at the categories, they include misinformation in the same bundle as hate speech and child pornography. So they're using online harm laws that are intended for child pornography to go after quote unquote misinformation.
Well, and they have a very wide, very broad definition of what constitute hate speech. When I first started covering hate speech, which would be back in the late 90s, you had to convince a court that under a very narrow definition that was set out by the Supreme Court, the speech that was published or broadcast had been hateful, according to some very narrow definitions. Now, really, hate is in the ear of the hearer. It's not in the mouth of the speaker. So if you say something that the most sensitive activist in a ideological cause thinks is hateful, then it's hateful. And that's what I worry about too, is that, child pornography, fine. We should keep children safe from pornographers. But if the person in an activist organization who hears my microaggression feels that they're hated upon as a result of it, they can go to the internet or to the upcoming Internet Safety Board and say, this is really bad. You should take it down. There's a good example of that too. The CRTC has been petitioned by EGAL, which is an LGBTQ rights group, to bar Fox News from being rebroadcast in Canada, from the cable stations or the satellite services from carrying Fox News, because Fox News has lots of people on it who don't believe that trans people have a right to all the same protections that non-trans people do, or that LGBTQ communities I'm actually not phrasing that properly.
But I get what you're saying. And as I was saying on the show yesterday, imagine if that power were extended to Fox News clips on YouTube. So it's not enough that you take Fox off the air, but Canadians shouldn't be able to access Tucker Carlson on YouTube or Rumble or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I have my own problems with Tucker Carlson. I remember when he was a bow tie wearing nerd about 25 years ago, who wouldn't say butter if his mouth was full of it. And now, and when he's the fire breathing dragon of the alt-right. And so I have trouble with him. But do I want to ban him? No, but I have the same problem with all sorts of commentators on the left. Do I want them banned because every time I listen to them, my blood pressure rises and my cardiologist tells me that I have to turn that off? No, I don't. That's what free speech is about. I like often to use the example of newspapers in London. There are 8 daily newspapers in London, and none of them, except perhaps the Times of London, makes any claims to being balanced. What they say is that among the 8 of us, there is balance. If you don't like what one of us is writing, you can read another one, and you can find the opinions or the slant that you want. And that's how you get to balance and freedom of expression. But you don't do it through government regulators.
No, and to go back to your column, I mean, if the government felt so strongly that it had been misrepresented in your piece, why don't they do, Katie Telford's favorite pastime of just planting some op-ed to rebut you in another paper? I mean, go down the street to the Calgary Herald and say, we'd like to denounce what Lorne Gunter said. And I think, the reality of it here is they knew that the facts were on your side. But if you don't like a particular bit of expression, respond to it with better expression. This is not a difficult concept.
And my editors did offer Wex, the chairman of the Immigration Refugee Board, did offer him equal space to explain what it was that I had gotten
wrong. Which is incredibly generous, by the way.
Of course it is. But I'm all for that. If you don't like what I've written and you will take the time to pen your own 600 words, have at it. And now especially, it's a little bit trickier when you have a printed newspaper. But now that we all have websites with sort of unlimited space, that's exactly how it should be handled. But not going to the social media giants and saying, this is dangerous misinformation, you should take it down. That is nothing but censorship.
Lorne Gunter, Calgary Sun columnist, glad you were not censored, and I'm glad to always continue to read your work. Thanks so much for coming on today, Lorne.
You bet.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.